It was not the sound of thunder. It was not the anger of nature. It was the day mankind lit the sky on fire. A city vanished in seconds. A morning that began like any other ended as something the world had never seen before. Concrete became shadows burned into the ground. The rivers, once lifelines for the people, began to boil. Skin melted away as if the body itself had betrayed them. More than 100,000 souls, mothers walking to market, children on their way to school, fathers heading to work, were gone. Not over weeks, not even days, but in one single blinding heartbeat of light. Those who survived spoke of it as the end of the world. Buildings crumbled into dust, but what haunted them most was the silence that followed. The screams filled the air for moments, then faded into an unearthly quiet, broken only by fire, by smoke, by grief too heavy for words. The very air itself seemed poisoned with sorrow. The sky no longer blue, but filled with an unnatural, burning haze. This was no earthquake, no storm, no punishment from the gods. It was something made by human hands, the deadliest creation the earth had ever known. In that single explosion, science became death, invention became nightmare, and thousands of innocent lives became fuel for the world's most terrifying weapon. A weapon born not on the battlefield, but in laboratories and secret rooms thousands of miles away, where calculations replaced compassion and a single decision sealed the fate of two cities. In that instant, science crossed a line from progress into devastation. Behind the silence of Hiroshima and Nagasaki lies a story that still chills humanity to its core. A story of power and fear, a story where invention met destruction, and ordinary people paid the price. Yet, before the name Hiroshima became eternal, before the world even whispered the words atomic bomb, it was just a city waking to another summer morning, shops opening, children laughing in the streets, life unfolding as it always had. No one knew they had only minutes left of that life. No one knew the sky above would betray them. If you believe these stories, these voices of the past must never be silenced. If you believe these memories must not fade, if you believe tragedy should never be forgotten, subscribe now. Together, we will step into the day the world changed forever. It was August 6th, 1945. A Monday. The sun rose gently over Hiroshima, pouring golden light across tiled rooftops and winding rivers. Cicadas sang in relentless chorus, their buzzing filling every garden and narrow alleyway. It was already hot, the kind of summer heat that clung to the skin, heavy and still. On that morning, Hiroshima looked like any other city, alive in its rhythm. Housewives carried water from wells. Children tightened the straps of their school satchels. Some headed not for lessons, but for work, clearing fire breaks against possible air raids. Workers pedaled bicycles across bridges, wheels rattling against the wood and stone. Doctors prepared for another day at the Red Cross hospital. Priests lit incense in temples. Fishermen let their nets fall into the river's shimmering surface. And yet, just beneath that normalcy, the war lingered like an invisible shadow. For nearly 4 years, the Pacific had been burning. Japan had launched the war with fire at Pearl Harbor. America had answered with fire across the islands, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, battles where the ground itself seemed soaked in blood. Millions were dead. Entire cities, Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, had already been reduced to ashes by firebombing. Families there had huddled in smoldering ruins, burying their dead beneath collapsed beams. But Hiroshima was still standing, untouched, too untouched. Some residents whispered the city was being protected by fate. Others suspected something darker, that the very fact Hiroshima remained whole was a sign that it was being spared, for a reason no one could yet see. At 7:09 a.m., the sirens wailed, another air raid warning. People stepped into shelters, hearts pounding with the memory of what had happened to other cities. But the threat passed. By 7:31, the all-clear signal rang out. Relief spread through the streets like an exhale. Shops reopened their shutters. Children skipped down lanes again. A little girl pointed to the sky at a silver glint far above. 3 planes passed overhead, too high to bring fear, too small to matter. And so Hiroshima returned to its fragile rhythm. Mothers calling children to hurry, merchants arranging their stalls, fathers walking to work. Ordinary lives bound together by an unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, their city would survive the war. None of them knew that one of those planes carried a single weapon, a weapon born in secret laboratories half a world away. None of them knew that in just 43 seconds, the ordinary morning they were living would end forever. They only knew the warmth of the sun, the laughter of children, the hum of cicadas, the last sounds of a city that still believed in tomorrow. Far away from Hiroshima, where cicadas hummed and children walked to school, another world existed, one of conference tables, guarded bunkers, and sealed documents. It was in these quiet, polished rooms that the decision was made. A decision that would change not only the course of the war, but the story of humanity itself. The war had already stretched across 6 long years. Europe was ash. Cities that once thrived, Berlin, Warsaw, London, Dresden, had burned under the weight of fire and steel. But the Pacific was different. It was not finished. Japan still stood. Since Pearl Harbor, America had fought its way, island by island, across the ocean, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each island demanded rivers of blood. At Okinawa alone, 200,000 souls were lost. Soldiers, civilians, children caught in the middle. American commanders looked at those numbers and imagined the price of invading Japan's mainland. Millions, perhaps, they asked themselves. Was the world ready to sacrifice so many more? And in that desperate calculation, something darker was born. Years earlier, in 1939, whispers of a terrible new science had begun to spread. Albert Einstein himself had signed a letter warning President Roosevelt. Germany was trying to unlock the power of the atom. That fear had sparked a secret project, the Manhattan Project, in deserts, in hidden laboratories, in towns that didn't even appear on maps. More than 100,000 men and women worked without knowing the full truth of what they were building. Only a handful of scientists understood. They were splitting the building blocks of the universe. On July 16, 1945, in the stillness of a New Mexico night, that secret revealed itself. A countdown, a light, and then a fireball that turned sand to glass and darkness to day. Those who watched it could not speak. Robert Oppenheimer, father of the project, remembered ancient scripture. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Some laughed nervously, some clapped, some wept. The world had just entered a new age. But where scientists felt dread, generals saw opportunity. President Harry Truman had stepped into office only months before, after Franklin Roosevelt's sudden death. Truman was blunt, decisive, and determined to end the war quickly. He was shown casualty estimates for a land invasion of Japan, numbers so vast they almost defied belief. Hundreds of thousands of Americans dead, millions of Japanese. And then he was shown something else. A weapon that promised to end the war in a single stroke. To Truman, the choice seemed clear. But was it? Why Hiroshima? On the maps spread across the table, Hiroshima stood out. A city still untouched by the firebombing that had flattened Tokyo and Osaka. A city with factories, military posts, barracks. Its very untouchedness made it perfect. The destruction would be undeniable. A message carved into the earth itself. Civilians, yes, children, mothers, fathers, they were not blind to this. But in those rooms, compassion was drowned out by calculation. Hiroshima was reduced to a word on a target list. In July 1945, the Allies had sent a message, the Potsdam Declaration. It demanded unconditional surrender from Japan, warning of prompt and utter destruction if they refused. Inside Tokyo, leaders argued. Some whispered of peace. Others clung to pride, to the code of Bushido, to the belief that surrender was dishonor worse than death. To them, even starvation, even ruin, was better than bowing to an enemy. And so, silence was Japan's answer. But to America, silence was defiance, and defiance demanded fire. The order was signed. Bombs were prepared. Names were written. Hiroshima, Kakura, Nagasaki, Nagata, cities placed in line like numbers on a list. In Tinian, an island base in the Pacific, men in flight suits were briefed. They were told of a mission, but not of the weapon's true power. Mechanics loaded a long, dark cylinder into the belly of a plane. On its side was painted 2 words, "Little Boy," and, as the sun set on August 5th, in Hiroshima, mothers tucked children into bed, merchants locked shop doors, priests prayed in temples. They did not know that half a world away their lives had already been decided. In the end, this was the silence that mattered most. Not the silence of a weapon waiting in the dark, but the silence of people who would never know what was coming. Men in Washington had spoken. Generals had nodded. Papers had been signed. And yet, in Hiroshima, the streets still rang with laughter. The cicadas still sang, and children still dreamed of tomorrow. Tomorrow would not come. The night before the world changed, Hiroshima slept in peace. Shops had closed with the soft sound of wooden shutters. Street lamps flickered over narrow lanes. In houses of paper walls and tiled roofs, children whispered to one another beneath their blankets, imagining a tomorrow filled with school lessons and games. Fathers finished their sake. Mothers folded laundry. The hum of cicadas was steady, ancient, unchanged. The war was still a shadow over them. Yes, food was scarce. Soldiers marched the streets, and in the distance, factories hummed for the empire. But in this city, untouched by the great firebombings that had scorched Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, there was still hope that Hiroshima might be spared. No one knew they had been chosen. It was a Monday. The sun rose at 5:30 a.m., spilling golden light across the Delta City. Fishermen untangled their nets. School children hurried barefoot to class, carrying small satchels. Women swept their steps, boiling rice over charcoal stoves. Soldiers polished boots in the barracks. Priests lit incense. The world felt ordinary. At 7:09 a.m., the air raid sirens screamed. The people stopped. Some clutched their children. Some ducked into shelters, but after 20 minutes, the all-clear sounded. The enemy planes had passed. The people sighed with relief. They returned to their work. Children laughed again, chasing each other in the streets. Housewives pulled laundry lines across their courtyards. The siren was just another false alarm, they thought. But high above the city, 3 planes were approaching. Not hundreds, just 3. One was called the Enola Gay. The Enola Gay had left the island of Tinian at 2:45 a.m., its silver body gleaming in the moonlight. Inside, 12 men sat in silence. Some scribbled notes, some chewed gum nervously. None of them knew exactly what the weapon they carried would do. They had been told it could end the war, that it was necessary, that it might save millions. In the bomb bay rested a weapon unlike any ever built before, 12 feet long, 10,000 pounds, uranium-235 at its core. The men called it Little Boy. At 8:09 a.m., the Enola Gay sighted Hiroshima. The weather was clear. The city lay beneath them, alive and unaware. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb was released. It fell silently, tumbling through the air for 43 seconds. People in the streets looked up. Some saw a dark speck glinting against the sky. Some pointed, puzzled, thinking it was just another part of the war. Another shell, another flare, another plane. No one imagined it was the sun itself falling toward them. Then light, a flash brighter than the heart of the sun. For one split second, day turned to eternity. The shadows of people were etched onto walls. The outlines of bicycles burned into stone. Skin melted where it was exposed. Clothes vanished into threads of fire. The temperature at the center reached 4,000 degrees Celsius. A fireball swallowed the city. Houses of wood and paper ignited instantly. Glass shattered into knives. Bridges collapsed. Rivers boiled. In a heartbeat, Hiroshima was gone. Then came the blast. A wind faster than a typhoon, tearing through the streets, flattening everything in its path. The ground shook like an earthquake, and then silence. Those who had survived the first flash stumbled into a world they no longer recognized. Buildings were rubble. Fires roared from every direction. The air was thick with smoke, ash, and cries. Mothers searched for children who were no longer there. Fathers clawed at ruins with bleeding hands. Bodies floated in rivers that now boiled with flame. Children, skin hanging in strips, wandered with arms outstretched, calling softly for their mothers. From the cockpit of the Enola Gay, the men looked back. A column of fire and smoke rose higher and higher, blooming into a great mushroom that touched the heavens. One whispered, "My God, what have we done?" But the city beneath was no longer a city. It was a wound upon the earth. 70,000 souls were gone in an instant. Tens of thousands more would follow in hours, in days, in years. Then came the rain. At first, it seemed like a blessing, a gift of water for parched throats, for scorched skin. Survivors stretched out their arms, opened their mouths, lifted their faces to the sky. Children whispered, "Water, at last." But the drops were not clear. They were thick, oily, stained black with soot and ash. It carried with it the pulverized dust of buildings, the remains of homes, and the unseen poison of radiation. People drank it, believing it to be salvation. Mothers tried to collect it for their babies. Yet this was no salvation. This was death in disguise. That black rain seeped into wounds, into rivers, into the soil of Hiroshima itself. Days later, bodies broke into fever. Hair fell in clumps. Skin blistered without fire. The bomb had not only burned the city. In a single instant, it had poisoned its people long after the flames had died. When news reached Washington, President Truman declared, "If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air the like of which has never been seen on this earth." In that statement lay the cold truth. Hiroshima was not only an attack, it was a warning to Japan, to the world, to history itself. But why civilians? Why children? The generals said it was necessary. They said it would shorten the war. They said it would save lives. But even as those arguments echoed, the question remained: could the end ever justify this beginning? As the mushroom cloud rose higher, the world entered a new age, an age of shadows, an age of fear, an age of fire hidden in silence. Hiroshima was the first, but in Washington, in Tokyo, in the smoke-filled rooms of power, another decision was already being weighed. The sun had fallen once. Would it fall again? The world had seen the first sun fall. It should have been enough. Hiroshima was no more. A city of 300,000 reduced to ash. 70,000 dead in seconds. Thousands more burning in silence. The world trembled. Newspapers carried the headlines. Families wept. Priests prayed. Soldiers questioned. Even the men who had carried the bomb looked at the fire in the sky and whispered, "My God, what have we done?" But in Tokyo, inside the steel walls of government, the truth was met with silence. Japan's leaders did not surrender. The generals believed Japan could still fight. They believed that surrender would stain the honor of the emperor, the spirit of the nation. Some argued that Hiroshima was simply another tragedy of war, no different from the firebombing of Tokyo, where 100,000 had died in one night. And so, while mothers buried their children in Hiroshima, the high command in Tokyo debated words: surrender, honor, sacrifice. The ordinary people had no voice in these rooms. The ones who had lost everything could not speak to the men who chose everything. Across the Pacific, America waited. Truman's message was clear: surrender or face more ruin. But Japan's silence was taken as defiance. The generals in Washington argued there was no choice. They said the Japanese would never surrender otherwise. They said a second bomb was necessary. So, in secret, another weapon was prepared. This one they called Fat Man. The morning was gray, heavy with clouds. Nagasaki stirred awake like any other day. It was a city of factories and workers, nestled between green hills and the sea. Fishermen rowed their boats. Children carried books to school. The people thought little of Hiroshima. Only whispers, rumors. No one could imagine what had truly happened there. At 9:44 a.m., air raid sirens wailed. Few people ran. Few believed danger was real. It was only 2 planes, scouts perhaps. Then the silence returned. But at 11:02 a.m., the sky opened. The bomb fell. 43 seconds later, Nagasaki vanished in light. The hills shook. The harbor turned to fire. In an instant, 75,000 souls were burned, crushed, or torn apart. Temples collapsed. Hospitals exploded. The cries of the wounded rose into the smoke. The blast was so violent that even the mountains around the city could not contain it. Entire neighborhoods were erased. Rivers ran black. Survivors crawled from rubble, their bodies unrecognizable. their voices hoarse with the same single word that had echoed in Hiroshima, Mizu, water. When news of Nagasaki reached Tokyo, there was no more room for denial. 2 suns had fallen, 2 cities erased, 2 wounds too deep for any nation to endure. Yet even then, some leaders resisted surrender. Some whispered of fighting on, of drawing America into a bloody invasion. But the truth could no longer be hidden. The emperor himself spoke. For the first time in history, the voice of the divine ruler was carried across the airwaves. He told his people they must endure the unendurable, that the war must end. Japan surrendered. But for those in Nagasaki, surrender was too late. The survivors, the hibakusha, wandered through ruins where their families had once stood. Children dug with their hands through ash to find their parents. Mothers held burned infants who no longer breathed. One survivor remembered, "I opened my eyes and the world was red. My house was gone. My mother was gone. I had no shoes, only blood on the ground." Another told of bodies piled by the rivers, so many that the water could not flow freely. But why? Why was one bomb not enough? America answered, because Japan had not surrendered, because the war needed to end, because an invasion would have cost millions more lives. But even now, historians ask, was Nagasaki truly necessary? Or was it a message, not only to Japan, but to the entire world, to Russia, to Europe, to the future? Why civilians? Why children? Why turn cities into warnings? These questions echo still, unanswered, like the cries that filled the ruins. What is certain is this: the ordinary people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had no choice. They did not sit in war rooms. They did not argue about honor. They did not carry weapons. They were mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, and in one blinding instant, their lives were taken to send a message they could never read. And so, as the smoke over Nagasaki joined the ashes of Hiroshima, the world entered a new chapter. Japan's war had ended. But for the survivors, the war never ended. Their wounds became their history. Their silence became their testimony. Their scars became a warning to every generation that would follow. The sun had fallen twice, and humanity could never look at the sky the same way again. The bombs had fallen. The war had ended. But for the people of Japan, the story had only just begun. When Emperor Hirohito's voice reached the nation, the people wept, not because they understood the politics of surrender, but because they finally heard what no one wanted to say. The war was lost. The men who had fought for years dropped their weapons. Farmers in the fields looked up and felt the sky was different. Children stared at their mothers and asked what it meant. And in the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, survivors stumbled through smoke, searching for water, for family, for any sign that life still existed. One girl remembered. The silence after the explosion was worse than the sound. I could not hear the birds. I could not hear my mother, only the sound of fire. They came to be called the hibakusha, those who were bombed. But survival was not salvation. Many carried burns so deep that skin melted into rags. Many more carried an invisible poison, radiation. Weeks after the blast, men, women, and children began to collapse. Their hair fell out. Their gums bled. Fevers burned through them. Doctors had no medicine. No one understood what was happening. They only knew death was still inside them. A mother told her story years later. My son looked at me and said, "Mother, why are you crying?" And then he closed his eyes. He never opened them again. The survivors bore more than wounds. They bore stigma. Employers turned them away, believing they carried a curse. Families hesitated to let their daughters marry hibakusha, fearing sick children. The survivors became strangers in their own land, haunted not just by pain, but by silence. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were deserts of rubble. Streets that once echoed with laughter were only broken stones. Rivers carried ashes instead of boats. But slowly, out of the ruins, the people began to rebuild. They cleared the rubble with their bare hands. They planted seeds in soil blackened by fire. Schools opened in tents. Markets grew from carts. The sound of children's voices returned, faint but stubborn. And within a decade, both cities stood again. Hiroshima built its Peace Memorial Park where the bomb had fallen. Nagasaki raised its peace statue, pointing one hand to the sky and another stretched outward for peace. The cities became not just rebuilt, but reborn, living monuments to resilience. Did Japan seek revenge? No, Japan did not seek revenge. Instead, the nation chose a different path. In its new constitution, written under Allied occupation, Japan renounced war forever. The people declared they would never again wage aggression. From ashes, a pacifist nation was born. But this choice was not easy. Many carried bitterness. Many wept for lost fathers and brothers. Yet somehow, vengeance did not take root. Instead, Hiroshima and Nagasaki became voices for peace, carrying their scars like lanterns into the world. At first, survivors received almost nothing. Hospitals were destroyed. The government shattered. The military disbanded. Aid was slow and often too little. For years, the hibakusha survived, not because of governments, but because of each other. Families shared rice. Strangers carried the wounded. Neighbors built shelters from scrap wood. It was humanity against despair. Later, medical teams studied survivors, often more as experiments than patients. Some help came, but it carried the weight of curiosity. Scientists wanted to learn what the bomb had done, not always how to heal it. The survivors knew they were not just victims, they were evidence. Across the globe, newspapers cried out in shock. Some praised the end of the war, others mourned the means. Photographs of burned children, flattened cities, shadows etched into stone. These images haunted the conscience of humanity. For the first time, the world asked, have we gone too far? Churches prayed, philosophers wrote, scientists who had built the bomb wept. Even Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, whispered from ancient scripture, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. But even as Hiroshima and Nagasaki buried their dead, the shadow of nuclear fire spread across the earth. The Soviet Union built its own bomb. America built more. Britain, France, China followed. What began as one weapon became thousands. Children across the world practiced duck and cover drills, hiding under desks that could never protect them. Cities built bunkers. Politicians signed treaties, then broke them. For decades, humanity lived with the fear that one mistake, one spark, could end everything, and it all began in those two cities. But Hiroshima and Nagasaki refused to be only symbols of death. They became voices of warning. Survivors traveled the world, telling their stories to anyone who would listen. They spoke in classrooms, in churches, in parliaments. Their words were wounds and weapons of truth. A survivor once stood in the United Nations and held up a small paper crane. She said, "This is my prayer. May no child ever fold a paper crane for another Hiroshima. Millions now fold these cranes, letting their wings carry hope where bombs once fell. And so, 80 years later, the questions remain. Was it necessary? Could the war have ended without it? Why civilians? Why children? Why two cities? The answers may never heal the wounds, but the voices of the hibakusha carry something deeper than answers. They carry warnings. They carry memory. They carry the plea that no other city, no other people, no other child should ever see the sun fall again. From the ashes, Japan rebuilt. From silence, survivors spoke. From fire, the world learned fear. But also from Hiroshima and Nagasaki came a lesson that still waits to be heard. That war can end, not in victory, but in loss so deep it changes the meaning of humanity itself. That peace is not the absence of conflict, but the courage to choose life over vengeance. That memory is the only shield strong enough to prevent another sun from falling. And so we remember, not for the past, but for the future, for the children who still laugh, the mothers who still pray, the fathers who still work, for the cities that rose again, for the dead who never had a choice. And so, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are not just stories from the past, they are warnings written in fire. They remind us that when nations choose pride over peace, it is always the innocent who pay the price. The lesson is clear. War does not have winners, only survivors. Peace is fragile, but it is the only path that honors those who were lost. And memory is the shield that can protect us from repeating the same mistake. If we forget Hiroshima, if we forget Nagasaki, then the same sun could fall again. But if we remember, if we carry their stories forward, perhaps one day the world will finally learn that no dream of power is worth the lives of children. Thank you for walking through this journey with us. If this story moved you, if you believe these voices must never be silenced, then please subscribe to our channel, because together, by remembering, by sharing, by speaking, we keep their memory alive, and in that memory, we protect our future.